In this video, I just want to be raw and honest with how I've gotten to this point in my life. And I'm not going to ask you to click the subscribe button below or hit the bell icon like all my other YouTube videos. Instead, I want to ask you to see me for who I really am, so you can understand that if I can find success, you can too. A quick interjection. I'll be really honest when I say I've been going back and forth whether or not I should be sharing this video with you. While it does give a very well-rounded perspective on my personal journey in business, it goes into some really triggering topics. On my journey, I've experienced physical abuse, severe mental health issues, and traumatic physical issues, to name a few. While I'm sharing all of this to be a reflection that you can overcome the tough situations in life that have been thrown at you, these are very sensitive topics that may be triggering. So if physical abuse, mental issues, and traumatic physical issues are topics that you find sensitive and may trigger you, I urge you not to watch this video. There are many videos on my channel that can bring you massive value without having to relive any of the traumatic moments that you have. So if that's you, take a second now, just click away. So let's get started. So people always tell me, Jen, you're so confident. And if I'm really being honest, I'm not really. But I have a secret and I call it being values driven. It's a very simple concept. Identify the values that matter most. So whenever life hands me lemons, I get to decide if it's worth making lemonade or if it's better to just throw that thing away. See, values are like a filtering system that help me decide if something is or isn't worth doing. And the values that are important are created by what I call voids, violations, and the vision you've experienced through your life. Voids are the things that you perceive is missing in your life currently. Violations are moments that have offended every fiber of your being in your past. And vision is how you believe the world should be in the future. These three things together form your values. My values are autonomy, generosity, justice, leadership, and legacy. And as you watch this video, you'll see how my life created these values. So let's take it all the way back. It all began when I was a kid. When I was 3, I fell out of a 3-story building and hit the ground so hard, I literally bounced off the concrete. At least that's what my auntie said, who saw me falling out of the window. When I was 6 years old, my mom, my brother, and I were T-boned by a semi-truck that literally cut our car in half. It was even on the front page of the newspaper where we lived. And these things really set the tone for the first 21 years of my life, which I call Chapter 1, just surviving. I probably could also call it Jen Chem Has 9 Lives. Anyway, then when I was 7, I fell off of a roof of a 3-story building right on top of my head again. It's crazy I didn't break my neck. Continuing in this timeline, I was heavily bullied by the girls I grew up with. I grew up in a small country town called Waialua on the island of Oahu in Hawaii. It was a small plantation town with the majority of the population being Filipino like me. Now, I'm 100% Filipino, where generally dark-skinned Filipinos live. But as you can see, I'm pretty pale, something the other Filipino girls didn't like. Anyway, because of that, I used to get bullied all the time. And when I would come home after school, they would mob me and beat me up physically. They would literally tear entire chunks of my hair off of my head. And you can't tell because I spent a lot of money fixing my hair. But if you rubbed my head, you'd feel patches of skin that just don't feel right. Because of this, I hated to go home right after school. So I would get lost in the wonderful land of books called the library. I would spend hours after school just reading until they'd kick me out, and I'd walk home with no fear of being bullied. This was a pivotal moment for me because it began my obsession with reading and learning and applying new concepts from other people. Some days I was able to leave school early and get home before the bullies could get me. I was growing up in the 80s when it was totally normal for kids to come home to an empty house because both of their parents were working like mine. So I would turn the TV on and enjoy the fantasy world I created of Dr. Wayne Dyer and Mr. Rogers. Watching these shows on PBS, I learned a lot of empathy and compassion. And I remember thinking to myself, wow, it must be really nice to live in a world where people were kind to you, even though you were different. This happened through all of my elementary school years, but let's fast forward to senior year of high school. I did all the typical high school stuff. Partied, drank lots of alcohol, smoked cigarettes, snuck out of my house to hang out with my friends, and sometimes had my boyfriend sneak in too. So my parents didn't know about that. I wonder if you've ever done that. But I was set that I was going to become something big. I thought I was going to become the Attorney General of Coca-Cola. So I never deviated from the path of being a straight A student. My senior year, I applied to Boston University, where I thought I could get accepted into Harvard after. And it was so exciting because I got accepted into it. And I was blown away because at 18 years old, I knew this was the path for me. The power, the respect, the acknowledgement. It was going to be epic. So senior year ends, and my mom tells me that she's going to fly me to Boston to drop me off at school. But before we go there, we're going to go to Disneyland to celebrate. So duh, I was even more ecstatic because Disneyland, before going to Boston University, the first step to becoming the general counsel of Coca-Cola, this was so great. So imagine my confusion when I find myself in Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles. And I'm standing here like, why are we here, Mom? And she said to me, Jenny, I couldn't afford to send you to Boston University. So I signed you up to go to Loyola Marymount. So let me just back this story up for a second. As a senior, my mom had forged my name on my application because I was offered an almost full ride scholarship. And Mom, if you're watching this video, I'm not trying to shame you in any way. As a kid, I didn't understand what you did. But now that I've had 3 children of my own, one of whom I paid for 6 years of college, I get you. I love you, Mom. As you can imagine, I was super pissed off. I remember having a complete meltdown right there. The type of meltdown that if social media existed way back then, I would have gone viral. Because in my mind, my entire life was over at 18. There was no way I was ever going to become the general counsel of Coca-Cola by going to Loyola Marymount. I decided I should just give up, which is exactly what I did. I went hardcore rebellion mode and said, fuck it all. And the best way to show it, I met a boyfriend who actually physically abused me. He was extremely physically abusive. In fact, I have a daily reminder. Check out my right pinky. It's broken. And this time of my life created the violation that being controlled by someone else was kind of part of my lifestyle, which is ironic because I went from being controlled from my mom to being controlled by my abusive boyfriend. And in those days that I dated him, I became a total shell of myself. I had no self-confidence in any area of my life except for how smart I was. So again, I doubled down on my brain, got through college as a straight A student, and thank God I had the bravery and the courage to leave him and graduated and entered into the second phase of my life, which I call my corporate career. I talk about this period of my life all the time, so I'm not going to get too deep into the corporate part of my life. But to give you a snapshot of what happened, I started working as a junior copywriter at the biggest advertising agency in the world, Ogilvy and Mathers. And here I learned about and fell in love with the concept of brand archetypes. Then a few years later, I moved to a tech company where I met Mary, who was my mentor and boss who had everything I wanted. A great career, a husband, kids who loved her, and everyone respected her. She was total badass. And in that time, I fell in love with, then married my first husband, had 2 beautiful daughters, and got my MBA from Haas Business School, one of the top MBA programs in the nation. But there is one really important void I experienced that's important to this story of who I am. When I was 28, I was diagnosed with a malignant brain tumor located on my pituitary gland that I was told was inoperable. To say I was shook is an understatement. I remember thinking to myself, I'm a 28-year-old Filipino woman from some backwater town in the middle of the ocean who worked her way into the executive seat. I was making $200,000 a year, had an MBA, was happily married with 2 kids. I'd escaped a bad relationship, and at any time I could die from a brain tumor. This was one of the most defining moments of my entire life. It truly made me understand the idea of living on borrowed time. A few years later, I found myself working at Verizon as the head of business-to-business sales in the Pacific region, managing a $1 billion budget while making $400,000 a year in salary and bonuses. And then it happened. The day I found out my counterpart made more money than I did. And don't get me wrong, he's a super cool dude. We're friends to this day, but he was making more money than me, even though the department I led brought in way more money into the company. Why? Because while he was playing golf with the big boss, I was sitting at my daughter's volleyball games, answering communications and directing teams to get things done from my BlackBerry. Yeah, that didn't work for me. The moment made me realize I wasn't going to waste another second of my life working for someone else who didn't reward me based on the results that I generated. So I made a big choice. I entered the world of entrepreneurship. Again, I share this story all the time, so I won't get too deep into it. But to capture the highlights, I built an 8-figure retail company in Hawaii selling, get this, women's underwear in 6 months. Ignoring the advice of my advisors at the time, I aggressively expanded it to 3 locations and was positioned to monopolize the entire market the next year. But guess what? That next year was 2008. Dun, dun, dun. The beginning of chapter 3 of my life, losing everything. In the span of 3 months, I lost everything I held dear. My business tanked with the economy. I went personally and professionally bankrupt, losing my house and millions of dollars. My husband divorced me, making me a single mother. And my grandmother, who was my best friend in all the world, she passed away. But the worst thing that I lost, even with all of that, was my confidence in myself. Just like the 18-year-old me who felt like her life was over because she couldn't go to Boston University, the 34-year-old me felt like her life was over because she'd lost everything she'd spent her adult life building. It's like my life fell apart in one fell swoop. I went from being a millionaire with money, status, and respect to sleeping on my grandmother's couch. For 6 months, all I did was sit on the porch watching cars go by while I chain smoked and sipped on Arizona iced tea. That was my diet. One day, my oldest daughter, Michaela, came outside, I think she was just sick of me already, put her hand on my shoulder, looked me in the eye and said, "Mom, you're Jen Kem. It's time to wake up now." And a reset button in my brain was pushed, snapping me back to life. Michaela was right. I'm Jen motherfucking Kem. And I wasn't going to let a string of losses keep me down. This moment made me realize I can overcome anything. I carry that attitude with me to this day. So I bounced back. I racked my brain thinking of what business I could build based on my current situation when it hit me. I'll do the consultant thing, doing the exact same role I did at Verizon. After all, when I worked there, they'd bring on outside consultants who made several $100,000 for only 30 days of work. Given how much money I made the company, why couldn't I do the exact same? So I got a part-time job at a local business office to be able to afford gas for my car and headed back to my old boss. I won't lie. I was feeling super ashamed to ask him to bring me back, but when I walked into that office, guess what, friends? He was ecstatic to bring me on as a consultant. The company had been on a downward decline since I left and was hurt really bad from the 2008 recession too. So he and the company needed all the help they could get to turn it around. That was the first client I won in my second business, a boutique Fortune 5000 consulting firm called Chemcom Media Group. Over the next year, I knocked on every dang door in the business district in Honolulu and won many contracts with global corporations. But surprise, surprise, I'm not perfect. And what comes around goes around, and patterns keep coming around when you don't address them. Because around this same time as I was rising, I got into my second abusive relationship with a significant other. But unlike my first boyfriend, he wasn't physically abusive per se. Instead, he would steal from me and then gaslight me or set me up to gaslight my children. See, he was a high-functioning meth addict. On the outside, he looked good. He could have easily been a runway model, but that's all he was made of. He couldn't hold a job, he lived off of his parents, and of course, he was a meth addict. So he would steal money or valuable things from my house to feed his addiction. Of course, I was naive. I didn't even know this. But I started noticing money wasn't where I left it last. Remember how I lost everything in 2008? When that happened, I lost my bank account and I couldn't even get any credit. So back then, I couldn't even get another bank account. So I had to do everything in cash. And you want to talk about embarrassing. Imagine being a 35-year-old woman transferring over a check for 20 grand to your mother so she could cash it and give you your money. It was crazy. Anyways, because of this, I stored cash around my house, all the basic stuff, empty cans under my bed, in suitcases, in folded up pillowcases. But then I would go grab that money where it always was, and I would notice that there was less than what I put in there. I chalked it up to my forgetfulness, but I had a feeling he was taking it. I remember this one time my daughter had borrowed a $1,000 camera from her school because she really wanted to become a photographer. The next day, we were getting ready for school and she couldn't find it. And I instantly blamed it on her leaving it because she's been kind of forgetful like me. So I bought the school a new one. A few weeks later, it happened again and I was pissed off. How did she lose $2,000 cameras in the same month? So I told some of my close friends and they told me straight up, Jen, this guy is on drugs and he's stealing from you. But I didn't believe it. I'm Jen Kim. I'm a smart person. I would know if someone was stealing from me and if my boyfriend was on meth. So he continued to steal from and mooch off of me for the next 5 years, you guys. Five years. Told you I wasn't perfect. Well, I built my second company into a multi-million-dollar business. Eventually, I figured it out and left his ass. Yes, can we just all stop for a moment and let the choir sing? Okay. So that began the fourth chapter of my life. Breaking my toxic pattern of self-sabotage and learning to love myself for who I am. I call it my dick detox. See, I realized something about myself. Every time I experienced tremendous chaos, I would add a man to my life to make my life even more difficult. In college, it was the abusive boyfriend who beat me up every day. While I was trying to find my path in life, I invited him to physically beat me up. Through my corporate career, it was my first husband. He's a great guy, but after high school, he had absolutely no ambition and just cruised through life. And in fact, I got into a relationship because I was running away from the guy who was abusing me. And while I was climbing the corporate ladder and built my first business, he was essentially my third child I had to take care of. And then when I rebounded to build my second company, it was the boyfriend who was on drugs. And while I was building a consulting firm that made me hundreds of thousands of dollars a month, I was literally funding his drug addiction. And after 20 years of doing this, I finally recognized the pattern. I found men who directly or indirectly made my life harder than it had to be. It was my massive form of self-sabotage. So when I was 37, I went on a journey to fall in love with myself, aka the dick detox. I spent a year dating myself and enjoying the lighthearted fun of flirting. I let them dote on me, dance, sing, go on fun dates, but that was all I let happen. And a year later, I learned I could go the rest of my life without a man. And I finally felt like I truly loved myself for who I was, not for what I could do. Yet, something happened. A few days later, I got this random Facebook message from a guy I knew since kindergarten. He invited me for drinks and to catch up, and I thought, sure, why not? That date was the beginning of chapter 5 of my life, having it all. His name was Nathan Francisco, and he ended up becoming my life partner. He wasn't like the others. He actually was a whole human that didn't have issues. What do you know? Okay. And then I got pregnant with my son at 40 years old. That was the happiest I've ever been with my body. I've honestly never felt so beautiful and secure in my body than when I was pregnant with my son. And a year after my son's birth, my third company, the Master Brand Institute, became a multi-million-dollar business. I'm currently in this phase of stepping back from running the business to work on my own legacy projects. I bought a vineyard that I dedicated to my grandmother, Generosa. I'm working on writing my first book. I'm focusing on my health and building relationships with people I want to have in my life. And since I'm in the middle of chapter 5, I'll save it for another video to tell you how the rest of it goes. Lately, I've really been on this thing of looking at life like soup. Throughout your life, you're adding voids and violations and vision, and they all come together to create a delicious flavor. Each moment is unique in its own right, but when combined with everything else, they all work in harmony. And to me, that's exactly what values-driven is all about. It's about looking at all the moments from your life and deciding that from them, what you truly want to stand for. That's who I am. That's me. That's Jen Kim. And if you found value in this video, I would love it if you shared it with somebody who can relate to any of the stories I shared today. I'm Jen Kem, here to help you get seen, heard, and paid for the unique value you bring into the world. Until next time.